1962, The War That Wasn't is my 11th book, I think. I haven't really counted. The book basically deals with the war of 1962 or the conflict of 1962, which was fought in Jammu and Kashmir, in Ladakh, Aksai Chin, and in Nifa, which is what is now Arunachal Pradesh. This book has a lot of relevance even today because this is 53 years after the event. Because unfortunately, this is a war that we lost very, very badly. And there were multiple reasons for it: geopolitical, political, and military. And unfortunately, after the conflict of 1962 with China, the entire thing was swept under the carpet. Nobody really wanted to perhaps talk about it, or maybe it was too close to the conflict. And there were certain reports like the Henderson-Brooks report which drew everybody's attention, but they were basically limited in their scope for various reasons. I was at that time in 1962 a 2-year-old baby, and my father belonged to Rajput, which was the first battalion which took the brunt of the Chinese attack in 1962 in the Namkachu Valley. In 1 hour's fighting, we lost 282 men, and 7 Brigade in its entirety was wiped out. It ceased to exist. And that set off a series of events. 3 days later, Tawang fell, and the Indian Army then withdrew and tried to hold Sela. There was a gap of about a month, and the Chinese, when they launched their next offensive, Sela also fell very easily. Now, why did all this happen? Because here we were looking at an army which in World War II had performed outstandingly well. The Indian Army's performance in Burma, the Indian Army's performance in West Africa, in Europe, had been outstanding by every yardstick that one can apply. And the same army had also performed extremely well in 1947-48 when the Kashmiri raiders had come into J&K. So what could go so drastically wrong that things could go so bad in a matter of hours, if I won't even say days? Now, to do a book like this basically meant years and years of research. And before we did this book, we also did something called the Northeast Trilogy, which was a set of 3 books which took 5 years to do, where we documented all the tribes and the people of the Northeast. The second volume of that trilogy is basically Arunachal, 14 districts of Arunachal, the Himalayan stretch of it. And that allowed me to visit every theatre of operation which had taken place. Some of these areas are still under Chinese control. Namkachu, for example, is controlled by the Chinese even today. But we managed to get there, sometimes by helicopter, sometimes by foot. And once you go to these valleys and you sit down there and you see what happened, you know, the truth sort of comes to you. And it was very important to put this whole thing together. And the book starts with the historical look at the entire Indo-Tibet problem, because what most people in India don't realize is that we never had a border with China. And in 1949, suddenly Xinjiang was, after Mao Zedong overthrew the Kuomintang government of Chiang Kai-shek, we suddenly had them annex Xinjiang, which nobody talks about. And that meant that Jammu and Kashmir suddenly became live. You know, you had China as your neighbor. And within a year of that, Tibet was annexed by them. Call it annexation, call it autonomous region, whatever, but you know, it was a gradual process. But India suddenly had a different country facing it, and all the previous agreements, etc., were all up for grabs. So I have traced all that, and we've also looked at what actually constitutes the McMahon line, for example. You know, we followed the route taken by Captain George Bailey and Morshid, the people who surveyed this, which was the basis of the entire 1914 agreement between the British, the Tibetans and the Chinese on the actual demarcation of the boundary. So we take a look at the historical section, which also looks at the relationship between Tibet and China. Now, contrary to belief, India probably had a lot more to do with China than with Tibet than Tibet did with China. So all these facts are there, and then once the Chinese came in and the whole equation started to change, what went wrong? The role of the government at that time, the role of the Prime Minister at that time, Nehru, because he was singularly in charge of foreign affairs as well as defense. Krishna Menon came in, the man who is blamed by most people for the 62 defeat, actually came in much later. Krishna Menon only came into the picture in 1957, whereas the Chinese problem had begun in 1950 itself. Now, there was a series of events, and all that is documented very carefully. I have not tried to pass judgment on anything. I have simply said this happened, and we've got hold of a lot of very interesting files, including the Thorat papers, including the Himmat Singh report. Everybody talks about Henderson Brooks, as I said earlier, but these documents are probably far more important because they categorically stated. The Kulwant Singh report, for example, in 1953 stated that we are going to fight China in the next 9 years. And then Lal Killa was an exercise held by General Thorat in April 1960 in Eastern Command, where they not only predicted the dates, they even predicted the routes through which the Chinese will come. And yet, nothing happened. So, the book is basically looking at that, and it also looks at the fighting in the western sector, in Ladakh, which again I was very fortunate. I have written a book earlier called The Long Road to Siachen, which has got less to do with Siachen and more to do with the geopolitics of the region. And because of that, and because I've also done a lot of filming with the Air Force, I've been able to get to places like Daulat Beg Oldi, the Galwan Valley, Karakash. People serving in Ladakh do not know that these sectors exist. I mean, they are as remote and they are quite terrifying actually. So we put this book out, and let's see how it is received. And it is the first of 3, because the publisher Halep, David Davida, has now asked me to do a similar book on 1965 and another one on 1971, which will be out at gaps of about a year each. See, the first real warning really came from the Home Minister, Sardar Patel, in 1950, where in November he wrote a very detailed letter to Prime Minister Nehru, spelling out exactly what is going to happen. And it's amazing, it's uncanny as to exactly how things folded out, came to be after that. Sardar Patel unfortunately died exactly 38 days after he wrote that letter. And everybody says, that, oh, what a pity Sardar Patel went, because the entire Chinese policy, he was the only man who had some idea what's going to happen. But Sardar Patel's letter triggered off 2 major committees with Nehru. He couldn't ignore what Sardar Patel was saying. So basically, there was the Himmat Singh committee which was set up, which was basically created to look at the frontier area of the northeastern tract, Nifa, Arunachal. And it identified the Chinese as a potential threat. And it worked out what later came to be known as the forward policy. And they then started pushing all the troops up, etc. Nehru was against it, despite being the foreign minister and having the Assam Rifles under it. It was the Assam governor, Daulat Ram, who was very gung-ho about it. He understood. Nehru had his foot in various camps. He was also projecting himself as a man of peace. He was looking at non-aligned movement, etc. And when policy is controlled by one person, it's always a high-risk policy, Now, the Himmat Singh committee was the first report which identified the real problem. Then came the Kulwant Singh report, which looked at the entire northern border, which included Jammu and Kashmir. And as I said earlier, he actually spelled out that this is going to happen in the next 9 years. Now, you can't be more. And Kulwant Singh was later the Southern Army commander. He knew what he's talking about. Then we come to Lal Killa, the exercise. But instead of listening to these guys, they were all shunted out of the army, because at that time they had already decided, or rather the Prime Minister had decided, to lay his entire hopes in General B.G. Kaul. And B.M. Kaul was then elevated to, was put into the fast track. It led to Thimaya's resignation, Thimaya's sidelining rather, not his resignation, his sidelining. With Thimaya went Thorat, with Thorat went General S.D. Verma, and a whole lot of political appointments came into being. General Thapar was made the chief. He was the senior most, but it was everybody expected Thorat to be the chief. And had Thorat become the chief, let me tell you, not only 62, but probably 65 also would not have happened. Because Ayub Khan used to be his adjutant when he was commanding for Punjab earlier. So, in fact, I just did a interview with Outlook, and they've, the headline of that interview is that who didn't want Nehru? Everybody seemed to have warned Nehru, but Nehru wasn't listening. And when a situation like that develops, the country pays the price. The Indian Army has always been, it needs time. If you look at 1971, the Bangladesh War, what did Manekshaw do? He refused to get stampeded. He took a full 9 months to prepare the Indian Army mentally, physically and psychologically to go into Bangladesh. When that happens, there's nothing to beat the Indian Army. Even in 62, where we fought as per our laid down doctrines, our standard SOPs as they call them, the Rajputs at Namkachu, despite being deployed on the river by General Kaul personally, he was the corps commander, he was there, he insisted that they man the bottom of the valley rather than the slopes. They took a very heavy toll on the Chinese. In fact, the Chinese, after the conflict, have admitted to having lost about 790 men. Our own casualties in 1962, initially, if you do not count the people who were slaughtered while they were withdrawing, is just about 1,000. So it was quite even Stevens. It is not that we were outgunned by the Chinese or outnumbered by them, but the problem lay in our doctrines actually. Our positions were such, we get into these bunkers and we used to face forward. If the Chinese got behind us, they knew they had us in trouble. And also, most of our positions were not mutually supporting. So the Chinese could afford to bring overwhelming force against an individual particular post, while the other post just watched. We never had this system of fluidity of movement. So we were fighting from fixed defenses. We fought very well. When the Chinese fought as per our way, we wanted them to fight. But when they got innovative, we were in solid trouble. We fought very well at Namkachu. We fought extremely well at Bumla. At Nuranang, for Garhwal held off a division strength attack of the Chinese for the whole day, one company. And then things went wrong because they were withdrawn. In Walong sector, the Indian army has performed reasonably well until they were given stupid orders, which any army would have disintegrated. And in Ladakh, in the circumstances that they were allowed to fight in, they have performed extremely well. The problem was that leadership had collapsed because it was all political. See, I think all these doctrines, cold start, rapids, this, that, these are all based on an assumption that certain things are going to happen as per your way of thinking. They never happen like that. I mean, when Prime Minister Modi, for example, recently visited Lahore to spend some time with Nawaz Sharif, who would have predicted that Pathankot is going to happen? And yet it was predictable also at in a certain way. I think a lot of these things they actually act as self-restrained, they put you in a bind. Why have these doctrines? Prepare for them by all means, train for them. But when you start announcing them and you start talking about them and saying, this is what we are going to do, the other guy is not going to come down there. He's not going to come walking into your field of fire. I mean, the last thing, he'd be nuts to do that. He's going to, in fact, avoid that field of fire, and he will come from behind, or he'll go from the left, or he'll come from the right. And don't forget that today you're talking of three nuclear power countries: China, India and Pakistan. For the sake of the people of of this entire planet, let's just hope nothing ever escalates beyond. It should be a no-start policy, frankly speaking, than a cold start or a hot start or whatever you want to call it, because it's a very, very, very complex and tricky situation, and you have so many actors in this that you really cannot. Today, your fighting is based on non-state actors. who very often the other side, it takes you 3 years to prove that they were actually trained by them. And even if you prove it, they say go to hell, we don't care. So you have to evolve techniques and methodologies of fighting. One thing which I would say, that on the line of control especially, and I have advocated this earlier also, the thing to do really is to give your company commanders the right to retaliate the way they wish to. If he oversteps, hang him by all means. But you see, the moment when that beheading happened of Indian soldiers, the company commander looks over his shoulder and says, what do I do? Who's he asking? He's asking the CO of the battalion. The CO will turn around and ask the brigade commander, what do I do? He'll ask it goes right up to the chief, who then goes to the NSA, who then goes to the prime. It doesn't work like that. So you have to trust your people. And let me tell you, the Indian Army is today, it has always been actually, it is an absolutely fantastic organization. We use it for all the wrong things, like we want to flood the streets and make them work as a police force. You're asking for trouble. But when it comes to guarding the borders, etc., these men know what they do. Even Pathankot, I think it was top heavy, the whole reaction. You leave it to the air base commander, he'll sort those guys out, In fact, he'll sit down and now he'll wait. NSG is coming, this is coming. Don't do that. That's where we actually make a mistake. See what Krishna Menon in 1968 in an interview with the Times of India admitted as much, that the main failure lay in the fact that Nehru and the Indian government failed to realize that when Communist China, when PRC was formed, they had come up through severe violence. I mean, they were actually finished, and then they managed to claw their way out, and it was brutal stuff. Now, Mao declared his policies right up front. It's amazing as to how the Indian ambassador at that time actually just turned a blind eye to what was going on. And China has always been, whenever it has been powerful, it has always been expansionist. And it was a matter of time. You see, the moment they took Tibet, they had to take Aksai Chin. Because Aksai Chin is the link between Tibet and Xinjiang. They had to cut through that. Now, Aksai Chin technically belonged to us. We didn't have any troops there. Ever since the independence, we used to have a post of the Jammu and Kashmir state forces. We had withdrawn that also. We are talking about a massive swath of land, average heights at 18,000 feet. But the Chinese wanted it, and they were going to take it, and they did. In fact, when Chou En-lai came here, and Panchsheel was signed in 1954, it was a joke, because the Chinese had already begun work on the Aksai Chin highway in 1951. So, Chinese motivation has always been a tactical one. Now, everybody is very critical of Indians having gone in for the forward policy and having pushed their troops up. Nobody is talking about the Chinese. The Chinese not only pushed their troops up, they built highways, and they distorted history to make it sound exactly the way they wanted to. And Chinese doctrine has always been occupy the highest feature and then take the next feature and then take the next feature. And that's exactly what they did, because if you look at their claim on the boundary line in Ladakh, in a period of 4 years, between 1957 and 1962, in 5 years, that claim line itself changed 3 times. Himalayan Blunder was written by John Dalby, who was the commander of 7th Brigade. He was the brigade commander of in which my father's battalion was there, and he was responsible for the Namkachu disaster. It's a very good book. It's a very good book, and but it's a self-exonerating book, because the brigadier is telling you the truth, but he's telling you a colored version of events. Colored in the sense that he's not lying. Nowhere does he lie. He is brutally honest, even about his own reactions. But the problem with that book is, and I have actually commented on that in mine, that once he was commanding troops in 7th Brigade, it doesn't really matter what Nehru is doing or what Krishna Menon is doing or whom they are talking with or what is going on. As a brigade commander, your job is your commitment to your soldiers. Now, two Rajput had actually was initially deployed in Wolong, and they were pulling out. They were on their way to Mathura. In fact, my father had left the battalion and moved to the IMA. That's why he survived. They were taken off the train, and they were told, go occupy this particular place. And everybody knew. In fact, the book opens, my 1962 book opens with a scene where there was a JCO called Subedar Dashrath Singh. He got shot 24 times in the stomach. How he survived is nothing short of a miracle. In fact, the book opens with that. I'll digress for a second and I'll describe that to you. You see, after the fighting in the on the 20th of October, 21st morning, the Chinese came. There was a nurse, lady nurse, and behind her was an execution party, and they had lined up all the wounded guys, including their own. And she would examine them, and if they were hopeless cases, she would put a cross with a chalk on the blanket, and the guys behind him would put a pistol to the man's head and talk. He'd be dead. Now she came to Dashrath, and she leaned close to him and she asked him, Subedar Sahab, aap kahan ke rehne wale ho? In Hindi, in perfect Hindi. And the man was from Etawah. He's still alive, by the way. He's 94 years old. 24 bullets in the stomach. Maybe that's a good way to survive long. Who knows? And she said, Subedar Sahab, aap kahan ke rehne wale ho? And he said, Allahabad, though he was from Etawah. So she looked at him and she put a tick. And he was perhaps the most badly wounded out of the whole lot. That's the irony of the whole thing. So they picked him up, and the Chinese doctors then got busy with him, etc., etc., and he survived. And when he was handed over, when they handed over the POWs the wounded POWs at Bumla, she stayed back with her case file and described the whole thing to the Indian doctors. Now, Dashrath had actually pointed out to to General Kaul in a conference that what are you doing? You got us in the bottom of the valley. I mean, this is against any basic common sense. But this is the point where Dalvi and everybody needed to step in. They didn't. They didn't have the moral courage. And he says so himself in his own book. He says, I would have been branded a coward. Because there was this whole thing that the Chinese will not react, and if it was going to be a picnic and suddenly we had captured the Thagla Ridge, the whole country would have garlanded the whole lot. That is what Kaul was banking on. But the moment the bullets started to fly, the whole thing just unraveled. And I think a major portion of the blame has to go to Dalvi, which is something which any brigade commander, his loyalty has to be to his troops first. They are looking at him for survival and to be able to fight. They are not. A soldier sitting in the trench is not going to say, get me the Prime Minister on the line. It doesn't work like that. I've looked at, as I said earlier, history, the geopolitical situation, the history. I've looked at how, not just history on the northern side of the Himalayas, but also on the southern side of the Himalayas. There are not too many anecdotes. There wasn't much fighting. In real terms, what was the quantum of fighting? Except for Wolong, where they probably fought for 2 days or so, it never went beyond 24 hours. The fighting in Ladakh, if you really quantify, it's less than an infantry battalion. You have 5 JAT, which was in DBO, one company. You have 1/8 Gorkhas at Srijap, where Dhan Singh Thapa was later given a PVC. You again have 1/8 Gorkhas at Gurung Hill at Chushul, and you've got one company, Charlie Company of Kumaunis, 13 Kumau at Rizangla. That's 4 infantry companies. That's 1 infantry battalion. So how are we actually calling it a war? Even that is the whole premise of the whole thing. And so it looks at history, geopolitics, it looks at the Indian political scenario, and it basically looks at the civil-military equation which existed at that time, and the cynical politics which were in existence, which led to absolute disaster.